If anybody's got a Bible and they'd like to follow along, please turn in it to Ezekiel chapter 11.
That ain't gonna be on the YouTube, is it?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
Ezekiel chapter 11, that's where we're going to spend our time. If you do a comparative study of religion in the world, and you do it on the basis of the writings of the various world religions, this is a fascinating thing to me. That, take the Quran. I have a copy at home. I could bring it here and I could read from it, and what you would find me reading would just be a list of platitudes, sayings, things that we ought to do, things that say what God thinks. And that's fine. I mean, the Bible has some of that. The Proverbs, Ecclesiastes is like that. The Psalms in some ways are like Job, another place where you see the declarations about who God is and what he's doing. But most of the Old Testament and the Gospels and Acts are what? They're narratives, narrating things of people's lives as they walk with God. That is so unique in world religion, because what God is doing is he's engaging us not only in the spiritual aspects of being believers, but he's engaging us in the practical aspects by showing us what it's like in the lives of other believers as they walk with God. It stretches our minds. That's why when we look at the Bible, there are lots of things in there that are very, very simple and clear. No question about it. But these narratives force us to actually interpret, to think, how does this apply to me? If I'm reading something about, say, Joshua, how does what Joshua went through apply to the life I'm given to live as a believer? That is so unique in the world, and I'm so thankful that God did that. I mean, if it were all just sayings, we could clear everything up in 5 minutes, right? There'd be nothing to think about. There it is. That's what God says. That's the end of it. But it's not that way. God has chosen to give us narratives. I am so thankful that he has. And God uses these narratives not to just work on our intellects, but also to work in our emotional selves. And that's what I want to focus upon today. So let's take a look at this in Ezekiel chapter 11. I'll begin reading in verse 14. Then the word of the Lord came to me, Ezekiel, son of man, your brothers, your sisters, your relatives, and the whole house of Israel, all of them to whom the inhabitants of Jerusalem have said, they have gone away far from the Lord. To us this land has been given as a possession. Therefore say to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Although I have removed them far away among the nations and dispersed the house of Israel among the countries, I have been a little sanctuary for them among the lands where they've been sent. Therefore say this to them, this is what the sovereign Lord says, when I regather you from the peoples and assemble you from the lands where you've been dispersed, I'll give you back your country, Israel. When they return to it, they will remove from it all of the detestable things and all of the abominations. I'll give them one heart, and I'll put in them a new spirit. I will remove their hearts of stone from their bodies, and I'll give them hearts that are tender, so that they may follow my statutes and my regulations and carry them out. Then they will be my people, and I will be their God. But to those whose hearts are devoted to the detestable things and abominations, I am hereby repaying them for what they have done, says the Lord. Wow. If only God would be that specific with America. Wouldn't that be nice? Be very helpful, I think, right now. He's making a direct connection here between the events in which they are living and having soft hearts. That is so, if I didn't say anything else, I would say, please think about that. The fact that God is taking events in the world, they're just like we are. They're looking at geopolitical things. They're looking at all, as a matter of fact, this is very geopolitical. What's going on? This is a very dark time for them. The Babylonian captivity is in effect when Ezekiel writes this. He's one of the captives. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, Daniel, they've all been deported to Babylon. Ezekiel's been deported. Lots of Jews, some estimates I've seen ran it anywhere from 30 to 60,000 of them have been deported to Babylon. They didn't want to go. They were taken there and enslaved there. And a lot of Babylonians have come back to live in Israel. Think about what it would be like. Here we are. Now, we remember 9/11 vividly. I think everybody in this room, we're all old enough to have it. That's a fixture in our minds. Imagine if tomorrow we wake up and the entire White House and Capitol building have been wiped off the map. Now, we think, oh, that could never, well, it could happen. There are explosives developed around the world big enough to do that easily. Let's just say, how would we feel? That's exactly what's happened to these people. The temple is gone. I don't know if you've ever seen images of the temple or how big it is and how magnificent it was. I mean, it was one of the wonders of the world. People said that when the sun was shining against the face of the temple and you were in Jerusalem, you could not look at it. It was so, all the white marble, all the gold, all the jewelry that was put on the face of it was so reflective of the sun you couldn't gaze at it. It's gone. All the gold's gone. All the fixtures inside that were valuable are gone. Everything that could burn has been burned. There are, right after this happened, there were corpses everywhere, all over Israel, where the Babylonians killed thousands by the sword. That's the situation they're in. And God says, I'm repaying you for what you've done. Think about what that would mean. But keep this in mind. You can take it from the very text we've just read. God did not want to do this. He sent prophet after prophet. Book of Jeremiah is nothing but a prophecy, top to bottom, expressing the fact that God did not want to do any of this. He's telling them, there's a reason I did this, and it's for your good. Every time I read something in the Old Testament where God brings the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, the Philistines, whoever he brings to judge them, I think about that old Nazarene hymn. You may not be familiar with it. It's a very good hymn, but it's one of those that has a real simple chorus. He'll never compel us to go. He never compels us to go. He never compels us to go against our will, but he'll sure make us willing to go. That is exactly what's going on here. You know, think about it. If you take this text and read back a little bit, and I could have read for 30 minutes and it probably would have explained all this, but that wouldn't have been any fun for me, so I'm going to carry on. In Ezekiel chapter 8, there's the phrase, the women were weeping for Tammuz. Now, what does that mean? That's a strange saying. Well, if you do a little comparative religion study, you'll find out exactly what it means. Tammuz was an ancient Akkadian, Babylonian, Semitic, Assyrian deity. What did he do? Well, he was very much like Baal. He was responsible for the crop cycles. Why were the women weeping for Tammuz? What does that mean? Well, it's a very simple thing. Tammuz had a wife who was also his sister. Now, I'll leave you to figure that out. How these deities, they did things that you and I would never say was okay, but that's okay. They did these things, apparently. I mean, you can go to the Greek pantheon and see the same kind of stuff, you know, one of the deities eating one of his sons. I mean, come on. But this Akkadian deity who was married to Ishtar, who you see mentioned in the scriptures as well, who was also his sister, Ishtar, Tammuz dies in the fall when the leaves fall off and everything turns brown. And Ishtar begins to weep in the winter, which brings the rains, and it wakes Tammuz up in the spring. That's the cycle. That's what that means when it says the women were weeping for Tammuz. Do you think that has anything to do with the God of the Bible? But that was going on in Israel, you see. Why did the Babylonians come? Because coupled up with that and many other things, that's what Israel was doing. And God said, you know, I've sent the prophets, I've warned you, I've done everything I know to do to get you back, but you're not coming. So what am I going to have to do? I'm going to have to adjust your thinking. I'm going to have to adjust your thinking. We use the word religion. And by the way, if you were a follower of Tammuz, when you went to church, if you want to call it that, what did you do? You had an orgy. That's what you did, right? You're looking at the deity of procreation, Ishtar, and the deity of the spring and life and being verdant. So you go to church and you have an orgy. I can understand the appeal. So religion, we use that word religion. Religion, if you look up did you know nobody knows what that word means? Did you know that? There is no actual definition for it. The closest we can come is a word that's found in Latin that means to be bound. To be bound. Now, that's why when people say Christianity and they couple it up with religion, I guess in colloquial terms that's true, but I don't see it that way at all. But there is a sense where it makes sense that we're bound in a way. We become the property of God Almighty in a sense that we're not. But religion has this picture for a lot of people of a kind of somber reflection. You see this in the monastery tradition where people would isolate themselves from normal life and they would find themselves focusing on God in such a way that everything about their life was just an attempt to be religious. That's one pole. There's another pole of religion, and that's Tammuz, where the religious expression becomes, let's go crazy. Neither pole of this is proper, but they both contain truth. Here's what I mean. God, the worship of the God of the Bible, connects all of who we are with Him. That includes the crazy. David danced before the Lord so much that one of his wives was embarrassed by it. He was so happy to know God that he couldn't help himself. It also contains somber reflection, where a person just goes like Hezekiah and spreads that letter from the Assyrians out before God and says, God, I need your help. If we walk with God, no part of who we are is exempt from God's intrusion into who we are. Not one bit. And if any of us thinks that we have a part of our lives where we say to God, here and no further, you might need to talk to Him about that. If we set anything in front of God and say, this is mine, then we're doing exactly what Israel was doing with their idolatry. Think about the meaning of that for just a moment. Is there any, Dallas Willard asks this question, can we rightly say that there's anything in this universe where Jesus doesn't look at it and say, it's mine? Is there? Seems to me the Maker owns everything that is. So becoming born again can bring, and I think it does, exactly what Ezekiel wants for the Jews here. He wants their hearts of stone to be removed, and he wants them to have a heart that is tender. The Spirit of God comes into us, and I'll just say it for what I think it is experientially, and you reflect on it for your own life. When God comes into us, we are far more easily touched in our inner being than we would be if God weren't. Kind of like what we talked about in Sunday school a little bit today. That He comes in and He gives us a heart that is far more sensitive, far more easily touched by the things that we see around us. Jesus was called the man of sorrows. That's not for nothing. That's not for nothing. And for some of us, I would say, and people with whom I routinely converse, this having that softer heart is something that's not necessarily welcome for a lot of people. They don't want it. I can understand that. I think Marshall said it in Sunday school so well. Once you're born again, stuff comes into your life that you just have to deal with, because now it's real in a way that it's not real when the Spirit of God is not in us. Emotions can be so useful to God in all of us, and so useful to Him in a way that maybe we don't think about it. I love the Psalms, although I will say this, and take this however you want. For me, a lot of times the Psalms are so beyond me in that I can't feel what the Psalms are telling me the person who wrote it felt. I wish I could. But here's one, Psalm 126. The writer says, those who shed tears as they plant, this is one of these farming metaphors, will shout for joy when they reap the harvest. The one who weeps while they're walking along with their bag, carrying the bag of seed, will certainly come in with a shout of joy when they bring in the sheaves of the grain. The distinction is one that says everything about who we are, God is touching. He touches us in our pain. He touches us in our joy. He touches us in everything in between. And if we'll invest that, God will bring a harvest to us and to others through us. We talked in Sunday school about that sensitivity that says, I'm being prompted to do something. Do it. God will use that. He'll take that investment. The paradox here is the fact that so much in our lives as pain gets planted and produces joy. That's a really hard thing to think about. But look at the Jewish situation. What was God trying to produce in the Jews by bringing the Babylonians? He was trying to produce just what the Bible says is good, a broken and contrite heart. Who wants their heart broken? I mean, really, if you think about it, who wants their heart broken? But other people are affected by that. I will say this for me. One of my greatest frustrations in the world, and this goes all the way back to George Bush Sr., when he was running for re-election. What frustrated me more than anything, and this goes for all politicians, I don't care who they are, maybe there's an exception out there. If you know of one, that's great. I wish I did. They get in front of a microphone or they get in front of a crowd, and nothing they do is ever wrong. Nothing they project or say or propose is ever wrong. Now, what I would love, I would vote for this person as quickly as I could get to a poll place if I heard a politician stand in front of a crowd and say, you know, when I said what I said or I did what I did, I messed up. I am so wrong and I am so sorry, and I promise you I'm going to try to do better. Man, I'd vote for that person right now. But you don't ever see that. Why is that? That's the change that God produces in us. When we become born again, anybody, you talk to anybody who the Spirit of God lives in, what do they say? I am in so many ways not as I ought to be. That's a broken and contrite heart. When we speak to God, the purest prayers we ever utter are those we utter when we are absolutely desperate. We are so close to God when we are so desperate. Why would God bring the Babylonians? He wants them desperate. He wants them desperate because they need to be. They've forgotten him. They've moved away. There are things that happen to us that we cannot express. We don't have words for it. Paul says, well, then the Spirit of God comes with groanings much deeper than we can make with words. Think about a family losing a child. What could we say to them, and what would they say if you asked them, how does it feel? I don't think they could say it. I couldn't. Don't think it through. When you come to God with those, I hope everybody in this room comes to God with desperate feelings. He wants them. He brings us, allows us in places where we have to have them to become desperate for him. Jesus became the man of sorrows in the garden. The man of sorrows. He knows what this is like. And I'll tell you, he knows it in a way that none of us in this room ever have known it. No person who's ever been a human being on this planet has ever known it. He knows what it's like to say, God, where are you? And hear the door shut and all the locks set behind it. He knows what that's like. You and I may feel sometimes that that's what's happening. We come to God and we say, where are you, Lord? And we hear the door shut and we think the locks are being set, but it's only a feeling. It's not real. It was real for Jesus, but it's not for us. He says, I will never leave you. I will never forsake you. I will never turn away from you. So when we take that moment of desperation and place it into the cross, God starts the process of healing us in a way that no one else can. Think how many people went home from Jerusalem on Good Friday. Remember Clopas and his wife. They're walking home. They're going back to Emmaus. They've left Jerusalem. Why are they leaving? What does it say? We thought he was to be the deliverer of Israel. What's the implication? We were wrong. For the Jew, seeing Jesus nailed to the cross, disqualified him to be the Messiah. We were wrong. So we're going home. We need a new Messiah. We're waiting for the one that's really going to come. This culture teaches us, of course, they got their answer, didn't they? This culture teaches us so many things that are so wrong. And one of them is, when I talk to people about prayer, I don't know if you've ever had this experience. I've probably in my lifetime said this to somebody who was talking to me about prayer when I first became a believer. You'll have a Sunday school class or something about prayer or a sermon. And what's the thought in the head? The thought in the head is, gosh, I just don't have time for that sort of thing. Okay, how many of us in this room have a microwave oven? Probably everybody in here. Think about our lives right now. Think about the fact that we're here. Becky and I live in Waycross. You live in Homerville. All of you live a distance that if you had to walk here, it'd probably take you a half hour. Microwave will bring us a meal in 3 minutes. We've got all these labor-saving devices around us, and yet we say, I just don't know where I'm going to find the time to speak to God like that. What does that say? It says maybe, and I say this with reverence, and the Lord knows how much I fear it in my own life. God may have to bring us to a point of desperation so that we'll seek him. He wants us with him. He doesn't want us to just meander through life without a consciousness of his presence in our lives. And you know what keeps us from praying, if we're honest? We fear that we will invest and God won't answer in the way we expect, and it'll all seem a waste of time. I had a missionary ask me this once. I have never forgotten it. It was a paralyzing question for me at that point in my life. With all that God had given me to do that I loved, I did. I loved traveling with the band. I loved playing guitar in front of people like that. I loved the music we were doing. I loved the camaraderie of traveling with everybody. There were aspects of it that were hard, had to leave Becky at home. But still, the actions themselves, I loved speaking in front of the church. I loved speaking in front of this one. But this missionary just absolutely sledgehammered me to my forehead when she said, Rip, it was after I had just done a talk in front of the church on the Jehovah's Witnesses. We were studying that. And she said, Rip, do you love God for what he does? And I thought, well, yeah, who doesn't, right? If you know him. She said, do you love him for who he is? I thought, wow, what a question. And I've never forgotten that. I think it takes us a lifetime to come to the place where we begin to love God for who he is. And it may take God dragging us through some pretty tough things in order that we come to that place where we finally realize he's really for us. He's really there. He really wants to spend that time with us. When I get ready for a sermon, I'll just share this with you. Happened this week. Happens almost every week. I'll be reading and I'll see something in the Bible or in a commentary or in just whatever, thinking about something in life. And it will bring a sense of deep, the only word I know to put to it is sadness, a kind of a sorrow, a sort of a. And I have learned over the years to say to God in those moments, Lord, this feeling I have in this moment, when I get up there Sunday, don't let it be wasted. Don't let it be wasted. It's valuable to somebody. Don't allow desperation to be wasted in your own life. Allow the Lord to meet you there in that desperation, and he will. And over a lifetime, we'll be changed by it. I don't know where everybody is today, but if I've said anything